Talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View, and for the first half hour, it's going to sound a little bit like our Friday weekend edition, because we're going to have kind of a round table, because we are blessed to have two guests addressing the same issue from a different point of view and a different perspective. I think they all agree on the basic ideas, but I think you're going to learn a little bit more. Just as you maybe get a kaleidoscope and turn a little bit, you get a new perspective on that. And we have, first of all, in studio, Lathan Watts, good friend of this ministry, Vice President of Public Affairs for Alliance Defending Freedom. We have his article, Corporate America's Welcome Retreat from Wokeness. We've talked about that a little bit with him, but again, if you're not familiar, we have a little booklet on wokeness. If you're saying, I'm not sure what that is or how to deal with it, that is a booklet I would certainly recommend that you obtain. And we have by phone a good friend, also an individual, frequent guest on this program, Robert Knight, who is an author and a regular weekly columnist for the Washington Times and a variety of others, author of many books. Of course, we have his website as well. This one is entitled, Much of Wokeness Fueled by the Sexual Revolution. And so, Robert, thank you for being with us as well.
Always good to be on with you, Kerby.
Listen, we can get into that for just a minute, because your article helped me understand that even though I'll hold up another booklet we've done on sex and culture, we've talked about Carl Trueman, I'd never really put the idea of the sexual revolution leading to wokeness. And that's really what your article that appeared earlier in this week in the Washington Times is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, no, let me give you a brief definition of wokeness. I think the briefest would be it's intolerance in the name of tolerance.
That works.
Really, that's how it plays out. Yeah, the people who are pushing wokeness are saying it's our way or the highway. We have this new set of beliefs we want to impose on you. And if you resist, the way we'll get around you is to accuse you of hatred or bigotry. They just keep doing this. And I think that it's come in two forms. Race, where there's a radical Marxist elite that has pushed the idea that America is unique in history in having slavery, and we've never really recovered from it, and it's a terribly racist nation. And so you have to do whatever we ask, whether it's reparations or diversity sessions. And if you don't, that'll be proof that you're still racist. So it's... and in terms of sexuality, we've had a sexual revolution going on, at least since the 1940s, when Alfred Kinsey came out with his fake sex studies, and the media bought it hook, line, and sinker. And then the pill followed that, and then Hugh Hefner launched Playboy. And in terms of sexual morality, the ball was broken. Everything poured out, and we ended up with where we are today, with a high divorce rate, abortions about 1 million a year, STDs out of control still. There are some good signs. I don't want to be negative here completely, but in fact, teen births have dropped, and but overall, it's the same dynamic as race. That's my golden retriever. You can hear her in the background.
Well, that's good to know.
She's fearless. She's fearless. Anyway, but it's the same dynamic. We're going to dispense with the values you had. We're going to impose our own, and we're going to call it tolerance. And they do it. And I think the most intolerant group out there now is the LGBTQ activists. They have captured colleges, entertainment, corporate boardrooms, and they have pushed and pushed, and now they're getting a pushback. And I hope we can talk about that too.
Well, that's what we'll be talking about. Lathan Watts, your piece, of course, reminds us that some of this has surfaced in DEI policies. And again, for years, people heard about wokeness, said, well, I don't know what that is. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, that sounds good until you realize a lot of the religious liberty cases you've had to fight all the way to the Supreme Court all go back to this, don't they?
Well, yeah, in some way or another they do. I read Robert's article and really enjoyed it. there's really nothing revolutionary about the sexual revolution. It's just a rejection of traditional morality and sexual ethics on all levels. And he mentioned how it has sort of seeped into corporate America into the C-suites, and it's because of certain activist organizations like the Human Rights Campaign that would threaten to boycott a company, or they would send them surveys and say, how are you doing on all of these LGBTQ issues? And companies wanted to virtue signal and say they got a great score from the Human Rights Campaign. But there's been really a cultural shift on the issue just in the last probably 5 to 10 years. And so now what we're seeing is we're having a lot of success. We, being our corporate engagement team at Alliance Defending Freedom,
right,
talking to these corporations about true diversity, which is diversity of viewpoint, not skin deep, the color of your skin kind of diversity, and particularly on these issues of the the rainbow mafia. Like if you are out there taking a stand, quote unquote, about flying rainbow flags and celebrating the original sin of Pride Month, you are alienating at least probably half of your workforce, half of your customers, half of your investors. And why would you do that? This is bad business.
Yeah.
And so we've had some success, meeting with some major corporations, working with shareholders, a coalition of shareholders, to introduce resolutions for the annual shareholder meetings. And when the C-suite sees that the shareholders are going to see a resolution on this, they get really eager to talk to us. And so then we're allowed to, we get the meeting, we can talk about, this is what you should be doing. Are you valuing the diversity of viewpoint within your company, not just what everybody looks like or, who they sleep with?
One of the reasons you wrote this, Robert, is, of course, this month is Pride Month. And I always make the joke, and I always get lots of criticism for it. We just had Memorial Day, and if indeed you died, well, you get one day. We have Veterans Day. If you served in the military, you get one day. If you are the President of the United States, George Washington, well, you really only get half a day because you have to share it with Abraham Lincoln. If you want to celebrate this country, you get a day at the 4th of July. But if you're gay, you get a month. And after a while, I just think there is a sense in which maybe we should write to some of these corporations and say, why are you celebrating an entire month on Pride Month?
It's even worse than that because they have what they've declared as Gay History Month. So that's another month. There's 60 days. They have various other days. The Day of Silence, where they impose their agenda in public schools. There are local celebrations. It's the most celebrated sin you can think of, because after all, it is a sin. The Bible's unequivocal about it, and there shouldn't be any confusion in that realm. And that's why they really have gone after Christians more than anyone, because the people in the church know the truth. They have the Bible, and they're the only ones really who are standing up to them. There are some conservative Jews who do. Certainly many in the Catholic Church have stood up to them. But they see the church as the enemy, because if the church sticks to the Bible, it says what they're doing is wrong. And deep down in their hearts, they know it's wrong, and they don't want to be reminded of it.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Both of these articles are on the website, pointofview.net. We will keep Robert Knight a little bit longer, and then Lathan, Watts, and I, we're going to spend some time talking about some of these religious liberty cases and Supreme Court cases. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Teresa Mull wrote a fascinating article with the intriguing title, Why Lumberjacks Are Happy and You're Not. A Bureau of Labor Statistics survey reported that lumberjacks and farmers are the happiest, least stressed, and most fulfilled workers. And the reason for that is simple. They work outside. It also illustrates that what provides the most joy and satisfaction aren't man-made. Now, this is one of the reasons I'm such a supporter of Christian camps and really any activity outdoors that connects God's Word with God's world. Bringing the revelation in Scripture with God's revelation in nature can have such a powerful impact on the lives of those who leave the busy world and get back to nature. Now, an article in the Washington Post observed
The most meaningful and happiness-induced activities were religious and spiritual, followed by the second happiest activities of sports, exercise, and recreation. Teresa Mull has also documented in previous articles how the drift from God and religion towards secularism are making Americans miserable. And if you think about that, consumerism, technology, sex, and drugs are not bringing us happiness. Numerous studies show that Christian belief and attendance at worship services are key to a happy and flourishing society. Now, that's not to say that being a lumberjack is all fun, cue the Monty Python lumberjack song, but there's something about getting outdoors, even if you don't plan on cutting down trees or harvesting crops. Other studies show that getting back to nature decreases our stress and also increases attention spans. We have moved further from our roots and the daily, weekly, and monthly rhythms of life. While we can enjoy the benefits of modern life, these articles remind us of the value of getting back to nature. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on the biblical view on wokeness, go to viewpoints.info/wokeness. That's viewpoints.info/wokeness. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our Thursday edition of Point of View. Lathan Watts in the studio, Robert Knight by phone with us for a few more minutes. And Robert, in your piece, of course, you talk about in the idea of wokeness that there is really a deliberate attempt to strip Christian institutions of their meaning. So we see what happens on campuses. But you also talk about even the attack on a Colorado baker. And I'm sitting across from an individual with Alliance Defending Freedom. And boy, Lathan, I want to get to that in just a minute, because you just think of the number of cases that have come out of Colorado that you at ADF have had to deal with. And so, Robert, sometimes there's this idea that, well, we'll just live and let live. I may not agree with you, but you can have your side and I can have my side. But there's an aggression coming against Christianity, isn't there?
Yeah, it's Hi-File Blum, who is a prominent gay activist. She's a lesbian who President Biden appointed to the Equal Opportunity Commission. Once said that it's a zero-sum game. One side wins, the other loses. I saw her at a conference in Washington. In fact, I think ADF might have sponsored it. And I talked to her during the conference, and I said, well, you know, if you get everything you want, wouldn't this pretty much criminalize Christianity? And she gave me a big grin and said, yeah, gays win, Christians lose. I thought, well, she's being very candid. Most activists are saying, oh, we just want tolerance. But it's really not about that at all. It's about imposing their values on everyone else.
Yes. Well, let me come to you, Lathan, because there are just a lot of cases lately coming out of Colorado. Not that I want to pick on Colorado alone, but
I do.
Seems like, yeah, go ahead. Go tell us.
So, yeah, I guess they don't have a copy of the First Amendment laying around anywhere in the state of Colorado.
Every time I turn around, it's another one.
Yeah. So, obviously, Jack Phillips, you know, his legal odyssey is now longer than the actual Trojan War.
Yes.
Then... You know, Laurie Smith with 303 Creative, which built upon the Phillips win and won another major victory for free speech in that case. We have a new case in Colorado right now,
with a camp.
Christian camp there that's been in operation for over 70 years. Colorado passed a law that would basically force the camp to open up bathrooms, dorms, showers, everything else to people who would identify as trans or however you want to say it, or lose their license to operate the camp. So we've sued them again. And we have a case that will be argued at the Supreme Court in the fall, also out of Colorado. Kaylee Childs, who's a counselor there, Colorado passed a law that basically censors counseling in the state of Colorado, so that if someone who is seeking counseling, to deal with gender dysphoria, even if the client has requested therapy that they want to become more comfortable with their actual biology, if a counselor counsels that way, if they counsel anything other than transition, they can be fined, I think it's up to $10,000 per instance, and lose their license to practice in the state of Colorado. So that'll be argued in the fall term of the Supreme Court. So, yeah, Colorado keeps us very, very busy. I've suggested in a piece at National Review that the Supreme Court should just institute an express lane for the state of Colorado. Let's just move them to the front of the line. Let's get this over with.
Oh, yeah. Colorado. Yeah. Let me come back to you, Robert, just before I let you go, because first of all, we have a link to your website, roberthknight.com. You can, of course, find your columns there, but people can also schedule you to come and speak, get some of your books and the rest. But it does seem to me that we would be in a lot worse shape if it weren't for some of these decisions that are coming our direction towards free speech, towards religious liberty. And I think it illustrates only so well, Robert, what you and I have talked about before, and that is elections have consequences, and the right justices and judges make a difference, don't they?
Oh, they do. Some of the judges that were placed on the bench by Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden really aren't judges. They're just activists in black robes, and they proved it over and over. But there are a couple of refreshing things that just happened today, and I guess Lathan will probably talk about them, so I won't get into those cases that Supreme Court decided today. But they're both, I think, good decisions for us. They were unanimous, yes, and they. Yeah, and
8-0 on one of them. Yeah,
9-0 in both, isn't it? Or I think there weren't any.
Oh, that's right. I was thinking about the one yesterday. Was 8-0. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and upheld a woman's right not to be discriminated against for being straight.
There you go.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
But one of the cases I mentioned in the column is about a girl in Tennessee who was suing her Christian prep school because they suspended her after she posted a message that the school said just completely violated their code of ethics. She came out and showed her girlfriend and then left a vulgar message later. And she's basically saying the school can't have its own code of conduct. It can't have its standards. That's what's really happening here. If you think about it, what she's saying is that they have to bend to her worldview. And if they don't, she's going to try to use the legal system to put them out of business. And that's what this is all about. It's about refashioning biblical morality as a form of bigotry that's actionable under the law, and then turning the whole civil rights apparatus loose on it. And you see this everywhere. And they did it to the Boy Scouts, and they succeeded because the Scouts caved, and now they're paying a terrible price. Membership is way down. I think in Canada, which did it first, reduced the membership in Canada from... at least I think they're down to about a quarter of what they once were. And I think the United States Boy Scouts, who are no longer even Boy Scouts, now that's
the Scouts.
They got rid of the word boy, and then they went to BSA, and then they got rid of BSA because it still had the B in it for boy. I mean, they just keep retreating. It's not helping them at all.
No.
And thank God Trail Life USA is there, the Christian version of Boy Scouts. And I say this as an Eagle Scout myself. I'm very sad that the Scouts bent to the legal attack. They didn't need to. The court upheld them. But here we are, and now we have a Christian alternative.
Yes. Well, again, I would encourage people to find out a little bit more about you, and we do have your article on the website. We do have a link to your website, and Robert, as always, we appreciate being able to call on you, and I thought it'd be good to put the two of you together since both of you have been writing this week about the issue of wokeness.
Yeah, I enjoyed your comments, Lathan, and I'll probably try to tune in to the rest of the program and hear the rest of what you have to say.
Well, thank you
for having me on. Kerby.
As always. And again, let's, if we can for just a minute, mention that your piece here is once again not only the fact that you at Alliance Defending Freedom have been dealing with some of these resolutions, you're also dealing with what was called GARM, which was the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, which went the way of all flesh. But nevertheless, these are some challenges. And whether it's David Bahnsen or ADF or a variety of others, there are people right now pushing the other direction in corporate America. And that's important because a number of years ago on a lark, probably shouldn't have done it, I went to the Morton Meyerson, and that's where ExxonMobil was having their shareholder meetings. And I sit down, and who's sitting in front of me? The people of the Human Rights Campaign. And they were pushing ExxonMobil because they did not have the kind of same-sex policies that they wanted. And it helped me understand that some of the real battles take place in the shareholder meetings, don't they?
They can, and what we've been successful at is using the shareholder resolution process to then get a meeting with the corporation, because it's telling that they're so scared of the shareholders seeing a resolution about it that they'll say, look, if you'll withdraw this resolution, we can talk about the policies that you want to get changed. And we've been able to. We've had 21 different policy changes in major corporations just this year. And, you know, and again, like, we're not trying to tell companies you need to be conservative. We're not telling them that you need to be, you know, Southern Baptist, you know, or whatever. You mentioned Exxon. I just want Exxon to get the oil out of the ground.
That's right.
Get it out of the ground, get it refined into gasoline, and sell it to me, preferably for, you know, less than $3 a gallon, if possible. Here in Texas, you know, 5 or 6 in California or whatever. I don't care what Exxon thinks about LGBTQ issues or any other political issue that doesn't impact the oil and gas industry.
Right.
And we're not saying, like, you can't ever talk about public policy. If there's maybe a certain presidential candidate who's running for office saying he's going to get rid of fossil fuels, I would expect Exxon should have something to say about that.
Yes.
But why would Exxon go out and make a public display, you know, of we're pro this and we're pro that and we're all of this and that and the other? Like, the consumers don't care. And in fact, you're alienating about half of your consumers, probably half your employees, and a bunch of your shareholders. How is that good for business?
Just show them some pictures of Bud Light, Target, a few of the others, and they'll get the idea real quickly.
Exactly.
So even if they don't see the light, they will feel the heat, and that is the case. Lathan will stay with us. We have a lot of other issues to talk about. By the way, we'll open up the phones to give you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
In 19th century London, 2 towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, the number is 1-800-351-1212, or just sit back and maybe take some notes, because I think you're going to appreciate this. We'll start with the one loss, and then we're going to talk about all the victories. That probably is the best way to go. It has to do with a case coming out of Oklahoma. Now, the Oklahoma Supreme Court, in its inscrutable wisdom, said that actually this religious charter school should not be given any kind of benefit. It's always a classic case of separation of church and state. It has to do with St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School. It is a religious charter school, and because it's, quote, religious, that means that according to the way the court ruled, it should not benefit the way other charter schools would benefit. And it ended in a 4-4 deadlock. And the reason for that is Amy Coney Barrett actually decided to recuse herself from that case. And I guess the first thing to explain is if it's 4-4, the lower court stands. And so that is I'll call it momentary defeat, but I see something coming back in the future to change that.
I think so. It is, I mean, as you said, because it split 4-4, that leaves the lower court decision in place, which was against our client. But a 4-4 decision does not create precedent.
That's right.
So no one can rely on this decision going forward. If another scenario similar to this comes up, which I suspect it might.
I suspect, yes.
They would not be able to cite this decision to say, well, you've already ruled on this and you should you should rule the same way. So it has no precedential value. But the effect is the lower court decision does stay in place. So that's obviously disappointing. But as you said, I don't think this issue is going away. People are hungry for options when it comes to schooling. The charter school movement is exploding. School choice movement around the states is growing. And, people want, here in Texas, there was a bill passed this session that was a big school choice bill, but there was another one that didn't get as much attention that allows for kids in public schools to be excused for an hour.
Right. Release time
to go to their church or their synagogue or wherever to receive religious instruction during the school day. So you can't fight consumer demand, and there's demand for this. So I expect this issue will be back, and hopefully we'll get a win next time.
Let's talk about it just from a trivial point of view, because you had a case a while back in which if you wanted to provide a safe playground for individuals, that those recycled tires and other material could be provided for schools, but they couldn't be provided for churches or religious organizations. And the Supreme Court did rule on something as trivial as that, didn't they?
They did, yes. That's one of our cases, Trinity Lutheran, and it has turned out to be really a landmark religious liberty / free speech decision, because what the court said in that case is that if you have a program that's open to the public, you can't keep religion out of it just because it's religious. So in that case, it was a program for resurfacing playgrounds, and Trinity Lutheran, wanted to be a part of it and resurface a playground that they had. They were told, no, you're a church, and the Supreme Court said you can't do that.
Yeah,
that's some really expensive legal analysis I just gave you right there. You can't do that. The court's basically saying you don't have to have these programs at all. But if you do, you cannot keep a religious institution from participating in it just because of its religious nature.
Right.
So, which is really how I thought the Drummond case would go.
Yes.
Didn't really foresee the 4-4 split coming, but so I think when that issue comes back, I would hope that that's the analysis the court uses again, and we'll get it right next time.
And again, if you look at a case out of school choice in Montana, another one out of Maine,
Espinoza,
same
Carson,
kind of examples in which they're saying, look, you don't have to provide a benefit to the various communities that would want to have a private school. In Maine, if you've ever driven around Maine, and I have, you recognize there's some places where if you want to start a school, you're probably going to need some funding. But then you can't then, if you're providing funding for someone to start a school, can't say that, but if it's religious, then you can't. And so there seems to be all the precedents coming our way. And so this one negative even maybe proves the positive. But just a minute ago, Robert Knight was talking about a straight woman who finds herself discriminated against. And guess what? We consider that discrimination as well.
Yes. And that's, I saw we did an amicus brief in that case. It's not our case, but we filed an amicus brief in that case. And I was scrolling through some of the news coverage of the decision. And it was shocking to me how many headlines talked about it in terms of reverse discrimination.
Oh, yes. Here we go.
There is no such thing as reverse. There is only discrimination. If you treat someone differently based on an inherent characteristic, race, sex, that's discrimination. It doesn't matter if the treatment is better or worse. It doesn't matter if that characteristic happens to be white skin or black skin or whatever. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. But that's how the news media is trying to say, like, the Supreme Court has now created this new thing. Like, no, it's just discrimination. She was discriminated against, clearly.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is telling about the sort of the media environment that we live in, and another reminder of, be careful and and think critically and read critically when you're scrolling through headlines. That's
right. Well, I always say read widely. Don't trust just one particular viewpoint, because there may be some others you haven't heard about. And another one, which I think we were alluding to, and we will get into that in a little more detail tomorrow, but it has to do with Catholic Charities. Now, Catholic Charities has been around for a long time, and just to give some people a perspective, the first time we actually had something that would be considered a legal precedent about same-sex marriage happened in the Commonwealth in Massachusetts. And when they did say that you indeed could have same-sex marriages, then the question came up immediately at Catholic Charities there in Massachusetts. Well, we have hesitation about wanting to place any children in our orphan program into a same-sex home. So if somebody asks for that, we will just defer them to another agency that might do that. That was not good enough for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and basically ended Catholic Charities ministry, which had existed for more than 100 years. So with that as background, the big issue this time is Catholic Charities is doing a lot of outreach. Some things we've talked about before with our friends at First Liberty Institute, where you used to work. And if you're involved in outreach, then that would, I think, not matter whether you're Christian or not, religious or not, but that's what the case is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, the lower court basically said that, well, this stuff that you're doing doesn't really seem religious to us. And therefore, they can keep you from doing this, or, whatever the subject matter at hand was. It is not for any court in this country to determine what is religious enough. Mm-hmm. It's none of your business. And that's basically what the Supreme Court said. No, Catholic Charities is Catholic Charities. That is a church. That's what they're doing is a part of their mission. Yeah. It is religious. And who are you to decide what is religious enough to be protected under religious liberty? Yeah. And that one was unanimous. The previous case that you mentioned, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was somehow shocked that Catholic Charities was, full of a bunch of devout Catholics who want to run the organization in accordance with Catholic teaching on the family. And who ends up hurting out of that decision? Who gets hurt the worst? It's the kids,
of course,
who don't get placed now because Catholic Charities can't do that. So now there are more kids who would have been helped by them, who need a good home, who are now stuck in the government-run system.
Yeah. Just before I take a break, I think it's just important to recognize that in the past, the courts and the government has always said we don't really understand, nor should we try to understand theology. And I remember that surfacing years ago. Some people might remember when they sued John MacArthur for clergy malpractice. And that's when the court simply said, wait a minute, we are not in a position to judge whether a person is following theological ideas or not. It was a bogus
suit in the first place, but I thought out of that was a good illustration of the fact that we as a government are not going to try to arbitrate between one denomination and another, one theological teaching or another. So when they tried to do this with Catholic Charities and say, well, you're doing so much outreach, you don't look like you're Catholic, that usually is the way in which we've identified various campus groups and Christian groups, right?
Of course. And, this is like the Establishment Clause, and people want to talk about the wall, Jefferson's quote about the wall of separation between church and state. The wall was enacted to protect the church.
Yes.
It was not to keep religion out of all vestiges of public life, but it was to keep the government out of the church's business. And that has been the precedent, just like you said. I mean, we're not going to get involved in matters of internal church politics or theology or anything. It's not our place to.
Well, just thought you'd like to know that a lot of victories, all going in the right direction. The first one, it'll just be a momentary setback. We come back, though, we've been hearing about some other organizations being called hate groups. So I thought we'd talk about that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let me take some phone calls here, and certainly one of the things that we are talking about is the LGBTQ issue, and that will relate to one of the articles we've posted about the fact that, if you can believe this, Focus on the Family and a variety of other groups now are listed as hate groups. I thought we'd go, first of all, to Gil in Texas, KCTA. Gil, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yep, I listen on the mighty 50,000 blowtorch of Texas, KCTA. Texas, Austin, Texas, I hear is considered the San Francisco of the Great Southwest.
Yeah,
there are a lot of.
We like to say Austin is near Texas.
There's a slogan that says "Keep Austin weird."
Yes,
they're doing a good job.
Well, Gil, you have a story. I want you to tell the story to our listeners, if you could.
I have a family, a relative, far removed relative that lives there. He's moving to Corpus Christi, of all things, which is kind of another throw in the name of God's name, because Corpus Christi, body of Christ.
Body of Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, how, they feel, what's the word? I talked to the lady, they feel endowed, they feel like they have their own manifest destiny, if you will, to take over everything. And that infringes on everyone else's rights. And, I think it was someone said about gay marriage, says, go ahead, let them do it. They got a right to be miserable like everybody else. But no, it infringes on anyone else's solemn rights to have a man and a wife as a family. Now, I don't hate any person. That's their personal right to do it. But if it infringes on it's like the gentleman said earlier, there's no law against being straight. But, now they're writing anti-laws.
Right. And I think that's part of it, this issue of entitlement. And I think the argument was, okay, I wouldn't want to marry somebody of the same sex, but we'll allow people to do that. And then we'll have peace. And you'll live in your life and mine. And it doesn't work that way. And it never has, because then the next issue is transgender. And next issue after that, and just this issue of entitlement and encroaching on our liberties is something you've had to deal with at ADF for years.
Yeah. And as Robert Knight mentioned, I mean, what they've basically tried to do is co-opt the civil rights laws that were enacted to protect blacks in this country, to remedy actual discrimination, really bad, egregious discrimination, and try to use that apparatus that's been created, the civil rights laws, the precedents from that era, and apply it, and just sort of co-opt it for themselves. And it's, I don't have to tell our caller this, but if you go back, you look at pictures of some of the marches that Dr. King led, a lot of those guys were holding a sign that said, I am a man.
Yes.
Like, just recognize me for what I am. I am a man. Well, contrast that with these other protests, right?
Pride
How dare you
parades.
Call me a man?
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's not even apples and oranges. This is apples and unicorns. I mean, which some of them probably want to force you to call them that.
Yeah.
And it's just not, the corollary just isn't there. But that's the legal strategy, as Robert mentioned.
Yeah. Well, one of the articles I posted here was by our friend Tom Tradip, Focus on the Family Fighting Back Against the False Hate Group Smear. Now, of course, I'm sitting across from somebody with Alliance Defending Freedom, considered a hate group. Of course, Family Research Council, a hate group. American Family Association, a hate group. I mean, we can go down the long list. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, which at one time was really dealing with discrimination and dealing with hate, has recognized that it's really hard to find hate. The demand for hate is more than the supply. So they've decided to increase the supply, and it's just gotten out of hand now. Focus on the Family as a hate group. Some of the others in there as well, of course, Dennis Prager and PragerU, Turning Point USA.
Moms
the
for
list
Liberty.
is getting longer and longer and longer. And if you were trying to have any credibility, that went out the window long ago when they said Alliance Defending Freedom, that's probably won more cases before the Supreme Court than any other group I know, is a hate group, right?
Yeah, first of all, let me say welcome to all the rookies. Good to have you.
Yeah, this is your badge of honor.
And, you look at, I think there's 10 new additions to the list. We listed off a few of them, and I read this and I was like, so I guess, what you really ought to ask yourself, like, if you're a mainstream Christian ministry or conservative, political activist group and you're not on this list, are you really even trying at this point? Like, are you really that effective if your name doesn't show up on this list? But as much as you kind of have to laugh to keep from crying. You laugh at things and you take the power away from it. But there's a reason that there's nothing I can say to discredit the SPLC more than their own actions already have.
Right.
But there are still people in government and people in major corporations in this country who look at that list in a very lazy way to make sure they don't get in trouble with other activist groups. And they just say, oh, well, we won't do business with anybody on this list. And that can cause a problem for you. And the SPLC is not going away, okay, because as you mentioned, there was a time they did real work and good work. And they have built a massive war chest because of that. So they're not going away anytime soon. So you can't, as much as I would like to, just sort of completely laugh them off and write them off. You do have to. It's just something that has to be dealt with.
Right.
It's just like a fly you got to swat once a year when the new list comes out. But we're well past responding to their criticisms. I mean, asking me or my colleagues at ADF or any of the people on these in these organizations, like I said, that are mainstream Christian ministries, mainstream conservative political groups, asking them to respond to the SPLC is like asking an astrophysicist to respond to the criticisms of the Flat Earth Society at this point. Mm-hmm. It's just a waste of everyone's time. So welcome to all the rookies, all the newbies on the list. We'll see you at the meeting.
Yeah, see you at the meeting. And one of the things is they did do an interview with assistant to Jim Daly, which is at Focus on the Family, and they reviewed all 13 pages of Southern Poverty Law Center posted online about Focus on the Family and why they are, and on and on and on and on. And if nothing else, they do a little bit later in this article talk about some other organizations and pastors and others that have spoken out. And it's almost like, as you said, if you aren't on the list, you're wondering, what am I doing wrong? Because you probably aren't making a fuss, but it just gone from incredible to just hardly unbelievable. And let's hope that as this list gets bigger and as they start putting groups like Focus on the Family as a hate group and putting them in the same category as the Ku Klux Klan, that most people won't take them seriously. But first of all, let me encourage people to pray for you and Alliance Defending Freedom, because you have one case still before the court and another case coming, right? Is that fair?
Yes, we're waiting on actually two decisions.
Okay.
So Skermeti and Medina. Skermeti, we helped Tennessee defend its law banning cross-sex hormones and surgeries for minors. And then Medina, we helped South Carolina defend their state's decision to disqualify Planned Parenthood from receiving state Medicaid funds.
Got it.
So those have both been argued. We're still waiting on the decision, probably here in the next couple of weeks because the term's running out. And then we have a case that'll be argued in the fall session. That's the Kaylee Childs, Colorado censorship case that I mentioned earlier.
So very good. As always, Lathan, I know you're a busy man, but thank you for giving us an hour today. And I was glad to put you up there with Robert Knight, two very good articles on wokeness, and I think they are encouraging. So let me encourage you to go to the website, find those articles, pass them on to others. Next hour, we're going to get into the book of Ecclesiastes that I think really has some great application for your life. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Thank you, Kerby. I really appreciate your program. You cover a lot of issues that a lot of us think about, I'm sure. And this is the first time I've ever called in, so I appreciate your input, too.
Oh, I thank God for what you're doing on Point of View. You guys have more influence across this country than I believe any of them in terms of tackling the issues and getting the truth out to Americans. It's getting to the point where truth just is bottled up on every hand. Every time you turn around, there's another big bottleneck against truth. I hope your listeners realize what Point of View is doing and supports Point of View in every possible way you can.
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things, so the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me, and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View, because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to talk about the book of Ecclesiastes based upon this new book that really helps you get into some of those very important principles that we learn from Goyelet. We'll talk more about the preacher and all of that in just a minute, because in some respects it relates very much to where we find ourselves in the world today. The book is entitled Everything is Never Enough, Ecclesiastes' Surprising Path to Resilient Happiness. It is written by Dr. Bobby Jamieson, and he is a very widely respected scholar and award-winning author. The book is one that I think you will really benefit from. We have information about it on the website. He's originally from the San Francisco area, began a career as a jazz saxophonist, and then went into pastoral ministry, has degrees from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, as well as a doctorate, a PhD from the University of Cambridge. He served as the assistant editor for 9 Marks, was for many years the associate pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., but then he and his family have moved to plant Trinity Baptist Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And Bobby, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Great to be with you.
I would love to hear you play the saxophone, because if nothing else, we around the table here appreciate that. And matter of fact, my daughter actually sang with Nora Jones in the jazz studies program at North Texas. But it is interesting that that's where you started your career.
You know, musicians often go for a long season, get very deep into it, and then shoot off in all kinds of directions. I've got friends who went from being musicians to being doctors, business school professors, all kinds of stuff. But it lives in you. It stays in you.
You know, one of the things about this is it gets into this issue of happiness, and I was struck by the parallel that you have with Arthur Brooks. Because if you're not familiar, Arthur Brooks started out as a concert-level French horn player, and then later got into addressing some of these issues at the University of Syracuse, then later at the American Enterprise Institute. Now he's at Harvard and writing about happiness. And in a sense, this book is really talking about happiness, because some people don't know what to do with the book of Ecclesiastes, but it really relates to this whole idea of happiness, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. The author, who calls himself Kohelet, you could translate it the teacher, the preacher, he really goes on a quest for the meaning of life. So starting in chapter 1, he sets himself to discover kind of everything that human beings do. And even in particular in chapter 2, he really sees if any pleasure, you know, the best food, the best wine, getting the best house and estate and entertainment and music, if any of that can be satisfying. And so he really goes on a quest for the meaning of life, particularly in terms of what will make him happy. And there's kind of a predominantly bad news, which is none of the things in this life will finally satisfy you. There's a kind of deconstruction and demolition that has to happen. But he also looks at all of life through the lens of God's gift, and discovers that when you see life that way, there is genuine happiness to be had.
What's so interesting is you talk about the fact that he is, of course, as you just mentioned, on a quest. He's also, in a sense, Ecclesiastes is also a question. You also say that the preacher, Kohelet, is a stand-up comic and used Jerry Seinfeld as an illustration. He's also kind of the philosopher at the party, and he's also a photographer. So in a sense, even though sometimes I think most Christians don't know what to do with the book of Ecclesiastes, it really helps us understand the human condition and maybe have the right types of priorities, as illustrated by the title of your book, Everything is Never Enough. I think that really helps us understand that the individual that is convinced that I'll be happy if just that amount of money, that amount of prestige, that amount of power will be enough, it really never is enough, is it?
Exactly. And, you could compare Ecclesiastes with Job. The author of Ecclesiastes discovered the vanity of everything by having everything. And Job discovered the vanity of everything by losing everything. And so particularly if you are in a more acquisitive mode, if you are trying to build a name for yourself, if you're trying to establish a career that you think will be fulfilling, if you're trying to rack up a certain amount in your bank account, Ecclesiastes is a particularly targeted warning that chasing any of those things as if they will fully fill you or satisfy you is really a receding horizon. It's always disappearing ahead of you. However much you invest yourself in any earthly pursuit, pleasure, or good, it will not fully satisfy your heart.
Well, again, I love the bookends there between Job losing everything and, of course, the preacher, if you will, Kohelet, actually having all of it. But let's start with the opening part because, again, if you're looking for some encouragement, he's not exactly the bluebird of happiness because here he says meaninglessness, pointless, vanity, futility. It depends which translation you have, but let's use the King James. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It's a helpful look at the fact that you think all the things you're pursuing are going to really fill that God-shaped vacuum. They really don't.
Yeah, that's right. That's really his opening kind of salvo against our illusions of where we'll find happiness. Another one of his most famous sayings that occurs throughout the book, all is vanity and a striving after wind. Mm-hmm. It's like you're chasing the wind around, trying to throw a lasso around it or a net, trying to capture the wind in your hands. That's what pursuing happiness, as if it will fully come to you through any earthly good. That's what it's like. And so Ecclesiastes is a very confrontational book. It kind of comes at you swinging. It comes at you hard. And you have to be prepared for it to evaporate some dreams or blow up some illusions. And in one sense, it's a very good book for a young person just starting out in life. You can try to learn some of these things that Kohelet learned the hard way. But it also, I think, is one of those books that tends to resonate with us more deeply when we ourselves have gone through some hard knocks, seen some dreams die, been through some hardships or tragedies. Even then, the statement that everything is fleeting, that nothing is fully going to satisfy, that can be a weirdly kind of liberating statement of truth. Even just to recognize, oh, wait a minute, that's right. I was loading up my whole happiness in this life. I was putting my whole, kind of weight on this one thing working out. There's a liberation and a freedom that comes from recognizing nothing in life's going to do that for you.
It's kind of like what we call a cautionary tale. And whether you're at the beginning of your career or the end of your life, I think there's some real benefits there. And so I do want to take a break, and maybe when we come back, before we get back into the book, I thought maybe you could share a little bit about how you've used this. I venture to say that you probably have spent some time speaking about that at Capitol Hill Baptist Church and Trinity Baptist Church and some of those, because I want our listeners not only to derive some of the wisdom that you have in this book, of the wisdom that is in the book of Ecclesiastes, but also how they could maybe use it either personally or for some of the individuals that maybe have a small group or maybe they teach a Sunday school class, how they could maybe use this book effectively. I might just mention the book has just come out, and it is a resource that we would certainly recommend. Andrew Wilson, you might remember we had him on recently to talk about his book, Remaking the World, said, few books in history have examined the subject of happiness more insightfully and honestly than Ecclesiastes. In this thoughtful and often sparkling introduction, Bobby Jamieson shows us why its ancient wisdom is exactly what we need today and how we might live in ways and benefit from it. He, of course, is the teaching pastor there at King's Church in London. So we're going to come back and kind of dig into some of these very important principles of wisdom that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Teresa Mull wrote a fascinating article with the intriguing title, Why Lumberjacks Are Happy and You're Not. A Bureau of Labor Statistics survey reported that lumberjacks and farmers are the happiest, least stressed, and most fulfilled workers. And the reason for that is simple. They work outside. It also illustrates that what provides the most joy and satisfaction aren't man-made. Now, this is one of the reasons I'm such a supporter of Christian camps and really any activity outdoors that connects God's Word with God's world. Bringing the revelation in Scripture with God's revelation in nature can have such a powerful impact on the lives of those who leave the busy world and get back to nature. Now, an article in the Washington Post observed the most meaningful and happiness-induced activities were religious and spiritual, followed by the second happiest activities of sports, exercise, and recreation. Teresa Mull has also documented in previous articles how the drift from God and religion towards secularism are making Americans miserable. And if you think about that, consumerism, technology, sex, and drugs are not bringing us happiness. Numerous studies show that Christian belief and attendance at worship services are key to a happy and flourishing society. Now, that's not to say that being a lumberjack is all fun, cue the Monty Python lumberjack song, but there's something about getting outdoors, even if you don't plan on cutting down trees or harvesting crops. Other studies show that getting back to nature decreases our stress and also increases attention spans. We have moved further from our roots and the daily, weekly, and monthly rhythms of life. While we can enjoy the benefits of modern life, these articles remind us of the value of getting back to nature. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on the biblical view on wokeness, go to viewpoints.info/wokeness. That's viewpoints.info/wokeness. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bobby Jamieson with us today as we talk about the book, Everything is Never Enough. Bobby, let's, if we can, maybe talk about this idea of gain, because, again, we have Kerby saying that the Hebrew word for gain is one of the world of commerce, and you have this idea of what does it profit an individual, and even as you talk about that, you think of Jesus and what would it profit an individual to gain the whole world and lose their soul. So there is, of course, the question, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And as you later talk about, satisfaction is really a retreating horizon, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. When the author of Ecclesiastes asks about gain, he's asking for something left over, something you can hold on to, something you can keep. And he doesn't just mean at the end of the day or the end of the week or when the paycheck comes. He really means like forever. Can you take it with you? And of course, his very famous answer in chapter 5 is, you can't take anything on your way out. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. So the author of Ecclesiastes forces us to ask, what does it all add up to in the end? And his point is that no earthly good will stay with you, will go with you. You can't put it into your coffin and bring it with you. And so in that sense, any type of, if only, I will sort of work and save up, and then I will have a good time in retirement, or I will attain this level and get to this part of my career, and then I'll enjoy myself. The other Ecclesiastes would say, don't count on it. It might not happen. Even if it does happen, you might not be around for very long to enjoy it. And all of it's going away sooner than you want. That's why I use this language of a receding horizon. Whatever you're chasing, it's going to just stay just out of reach.
Yes. Again, as you say, leave your job and your employability will walk away even faster. And you talk about speaking with a friend who worked for 10 years as a software engineer at a company whose name is ubiquitous in both noun and verb. 2 years ago, he quit his high-status, well-paying job to begin a doctorate in history in the hope of teaching with his passage. And you go through all the kinds of experiences that you have to go through because, of course, you have to write, you have to publish, you have to do all of that. And it's just a reminder that we all have these plans, but then reality begins to crash in on those plans. And part of that relates back to the other chapter that you have here on work or toil, because what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And toil is the engine, as you say, of expected gain. But if indeed there's no gain that stays with you, you can see sort of the futility or the vanity of so much of what we do in the human experience.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the sociologists I engage with in the book, Hartmut Rosa. He talks about the whole modern life is as if you are having to keep running upward on an escalator moving down.
Yes.
You have to work hard to stay in the same place. And I think there's been kind of a movement in our culture of loading up more and more meaning and value and identity and fulfillment into our jobs. And of course, it's a great blessing if the Lord grants you to do something that you enjoy, if the Lord grants you to do something that's a good fit with your skills, your talents. That is a wonderful blessing. And yet, so much of what we have to do in work is simply to survive. So much of what we have to do in work is a matter of necessity. Oftentimes, there are things well beyond our control where we might just have to take a job just to pay the bills. And so if you're primed to expect fulfillment, meaning, satisfaction, joy in your job, very often you're primed for a pretty crushing disappointment. And so Ecclesiastes, on the one hand, warns about having an undue attachment to your work. He paints a picture really of a kind of a modern workaholic, talking about somebody in chapter 4, verse 7, somebody who has no one else, no son, no brother, yet there's no end to their toil. Their eyes are never satisfied with riches. They never even stop to ask, essentially, why am I killing myself with work? So Ecclesiastes diagnosed kind of the modern workaholic standpoint thousands of years ago, which I think is an especially timely warning for our culture.
Wow. Again, this is part of the book, Everything is Never Enough. We're talking with Bobby Jamieson. We have information about him and the book on the website. Of course, I suspect you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we've got information about that as well. And another place where we oftentimes want to maybe spend time is in the area of knowledge. And you and I are both in this knowledge business, if you will. But even there, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. For in much wisdom is much vexation. I love that line. And he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. There is the hope sometimes that if I get these degrees or I go to these particular seminars or watch these YouTube videos, whatever it might be, read these kind of books, I will eventually have a point in which I will feel contentment. And if that's where you are trying to place your desire for happiness, you're going to be very disappointed, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. Ecclesiastes very often observes that the things we wish were guaranteed aren't actually guaranteed. And very often you can accrue all the knowledge, but all that gives you is an awareness of things that are bad and that you can't change. Against the kind of saying that was always rattling around, when I was in my school years as a young kid, knowledge is power, get it while you can. Well, the author of Ecclesiastes comes back and says, not necessarily. Sometimes you discover things that you can't do anything about. There is that line in chapter 7, consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. There are things in this life that we just can't change. And there is wisdom that comes about in recognizing that. But the author of Ecclesiastes likes to kind of rub our noses into the things that we can't change, we can't fix, we can't control. And I think he does that because under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the inspiration of the Spirit, the author of Ecclesiastes is discerning all the kind of idols of the heart. We idolize control. We idolize knowledge. We idolize being able to kind of plot our own course and guarantee our own way. And part of coming to trust the Lord is recognizing the things we can't change, the things we can't fix, the things that might be very painful that we can't actually do anything about. And that's when trust in him comes into the picture.
Wow. One of the other chapters, and then we'll take a break, is on pleasure. And the lesson there is that all pleasures are not created equal. Some pleasures are free, others enslave. Some pleasures dignify, others degrade. And really, part of biblical wisdom is knowing the difference. And it does seem to me that after spending some time helping us understand that much of what we might change or chase or desire, actually because of wanting to have control or whatever it might be, he's now reminding us of something else, and that is if you're even seeking pleasure, some are going to be helpful and some are going to be great hindrances, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. And part of the reason that some pleasures are great hindrances is because our hearts always yearn for more of them. They become effectively addictions. Like in chapter 5, verse 10, he says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity," or "this also is absurd." Now, why is that? It's because, I think of like a bathtub, that if you fill it up to a certain way, fill it up to a certain level, it'll have kind of a shutoff switch or valve. So you can't just keep filling it and flooding the bathroom. Well, money has no built-in shutoff switch. If you want money, because whatever thing money can get you, whether that's security or status or pleasure, well, the more money you get, the more you can get that thing. And so ultimately, of course, the problem is not money. The problem is the attitude of the heart that's making you want money so much. But money is such a powerful temptation because it can get you virtually anything. And almost anything you want, money can help you get it. And so that's why the author of Ecclesiastes kind of diagnoses the love of money as such a harmful thing, because it's kind of a giving free rein and even kind of a power boost to whatever harmful or destructive desires you might already have.
Might just mention we're going to take a break. When we come back, of course, we've just talked about money. We'll get into it a little bit more detail and pleasure, but also then time, when enough is enough. All of this in a section which he is actually described as the ground floor, what is absurd. The middle floor then is gift, and that gets into gift and enjoy and eat and drink and wealth, marriage, residence, and then the top floor beyond, fear and judgment. So lots of very important principles in the book of Ecclesiastes. This book really helps you begin to delve into it in a more organized way. And it's also a way in which you perhaps could teach it to others. So when we come back, we'll get a little bit of perspective from Bobby about how he's used it in his own life, how he's taught it, and how maybe you can do that as well. It's all part of this resource that we are making available. You can, of course, find it in your local bookstore, but if you go to the website, pointofview.net, click on the button that says See More, you will see that we have it available both in paperback and Kindle. Came out in April, so you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if you cannot, we have information about that on the website. And once we get into this, we recognize that this issue of happiness is oftentimes elusive unless we bring a biblical perspective to it, and we'll learn some more about how to do that right after these important messages.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kerby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continuing our conversation today with Bobby Jamieson as we talk about his book, Everything is Never Enough, Ecclesiastes' Surprising Path to Resilient Happiness. And Bobby, I thought for just a minute you might just share with us how you've used this book and some of this teaching, because I suspect there are others that would want to use it as well in their own sphere of influence and ministry.
Sure, a few suggestions. Well, what sparked this book was me preaching through the book in about an 11-part series at the church where I used to pastor in D.C., and those were warmly received. They were challenging sermons, but I benefited from them, and so did the congregation. There's kind of an unusual enthusiasm for them among the congregation. So if you're a preacher, a pastor, I would encourage you not to be scared of preaching Ecclesiastes. Go for it. It's a challenging but rewarding book. You know, in terms of using this book, one use that I hope people will have for it is maybe giving away a copy to a skeptical friend, maybe even a non-believing friend, but someone who's not afraid of wrestling with kind of the deeper questions in life, and using it as a way to start a conversation with them. Say, hey, would you be willing to read through this and talk about it? It's about this kind of weirdly philosophical book in the Bible that wrestles with big questions about happiness and the meaning of life. I think there's a way that, because Ecclesiastes focuses so specifically on so many different areas of life that we get so wrapped up in, whether work or money or sex or relationships, there's a lot to appeal to a non-believing friend in there. And I deliberately wrote, especially the first half of the book, without assuming a faith commitment. Obviously, I am, but I'm not assuming that the reader shares that commitment. So I think using it as a kind of one-to-one evangelistic tool or kind of a reading group with some non-believing friends is a good idea. I think you could also use it to accompany a small group study. If you have a small group that's regularly studying through books of the Bible, I think maybe you could read the first couple chapters of my books to get oriented, and then have several weeks studying through Ecclesiastes and reading through Everything is Never Enough alongside it, particularly having kind of conversations about in what areas of life are you tempted to kind of fall into the mistakes that Ecclesiastes identifies of seeking your full earthly happiness in this thing.
I think those are all great ideas. I would highly recommend the book. Even the cover, I'll hold it up for people looking online. Of course, they can see it on the website, is one that wouldn't be off-putting. It's one that I could hand to a lot of non-Christian friends and contacts that I have, so let me encourage you to do so. A minute ago, you mentioned money, and I can kind of tie money into the section as well on enough, because there's a particular point where it says, there is an evil that I've seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind, a man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is absurd. It is a grievous evil. And what we find, and I've oftentimes wanted to take that passage or maybe this section of your book and hand it to somebody that's in a get-rich-quick seminar, maybe a person that is convinced that by winning the lottery, all my problems will go away. All you have to do is spend some time with some very wealthy individuals to find out that they thought wealth was going to make them happy. And sometimes they're the least happy people I have a chance to ever get to know.
That's exactly right. One of Ecclesiastes' unsettling insights is that you could have everything except the ability to enjoy any of it. God has to give that to you. And one of the conditions on our part that influences whether you will actually enjoy any of what you have or not is whether you are content. That's an inward disposition. It's not a function of how much you have or what you have. It's whether you're submitting to the limits of what God has given you and thereby able to enjoy the things that are right there in front of you. It's a scary thought that you could have everything and not enjoy any of it. And Ecclesiastes means it as a wake-up call to point us to recognizing how can we actually grow content with what God has given us.
Let's, if I can, get into one passage that people know from Ecclesiastes, and that's the issue of time. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what has been planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, and all the way through that list. This whole issue of time and rhythm and planning, very important in the book of Ecclesiastes, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think one of Ecclesiastes' main messages is that time is in control of you much more than you are in control of time.
Yes.
So in that famous poem that you were quoting, each of those halves is actually the opposite of the thing that came before. And what it means is kind of whatever's going on at one time, the opposite is going to come back around, and the balance is going to sort of whittle down to zero. Now, of course, in the end, ultimately, there will be a time to weep and a time to laugh. But those two, in an earthly sense, given our mortality, will in some ways come to kind of cancel each other out. You can't hold on to the time of laughing as if that's all there is. And so again, here Ecclesiastes is kind of puncturing the balloon of our illusions of control. And one of the responses that Ecclesiastes holds out to us to that is a kind of humble submission before God, to recognize, like he says just a few verses later, God has done it. God has written history in his own handwriting so that people fear before him. We should recognize the limits of what we can plan, the limits of what we can control, the limits of what we can hold on to, and recognize that God is sovereign over all those things. So whenever we encounter our own personal limits, it should lead us to fear and worship him.
Again, this whole section is in what is called ground floor absurd. And before we get to the middle floor of gift, I thought we'd just mention, just in passing at least, just as money does not satisfy, just as status does not satisfy, also power does not. And that is a very important aspect of this as well, isn't it?
Yeah, this was the section I preached, that especially resonates in Washington, D.C. So especially, sure. I had plenty of things to apply it to there. We can so often chase, maybe you're not necessarily running for political office, but if you're chasing influence, if you're chasing the ability to kind of affect people, if you're wanting to be at the top of some heap, one of the messages of Ecclesiastes is that is never going to last. It'll go away quicker than you can think. And honestly, even the way that those rewards are allocated. He tells this story like about a poor, humble king who saved the city. Nobody knew who he was, and then he delivered this whole city and gets into power, and everybody loves him. And then pretty quickly, he's out of power. Everybody's forgotten him. Everybody turns on him. History is like a wheel in that sense. You're chasing something that doesn't last and can desert you instantly.
So again, one of the things that you have divided this book into is the very significant aspect of the absurd. Let's move into the middle floor, which you call gift, and that's gift, enjoy, lot, eat and drink, toil, wealth, marriage, residence. Maybe just to pick out a couple that I think are very familiar. Everybody's heard the idea of eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow you die. There's a sense in which, if you don't understand that from a biblical point of view, it sounds very macabre, maybe fatalistic, but it's, again, a recognition that, as you pointed out just a minute ago, you do not control time. Time controls you.
Yeah, that's right. In my first part of the book, which covers a whole lot of Ecclesiastes, the author's kind of just observing what he can see. He's noticing things. He's experiencing things. And what he sees is pretty bleak. It's uncomfortable. But if you look through those lenses with him, I think you'll start to see the same things. But there's these 7 passages throughout the book where he adopts a strikingly different tone. He starts saying things like, there's nothing better, or I commend joy,
right,
or go eat your bread and drink your wine with a merry heart. But the interesting thing is, he's talking about a lot of the same stuff. He's talking about wealth and possessions. He's talking about work. He's talking about food and drink. But there's a radically different attitude. And I think the radically different attitude comes down to recognizing their gifts from God. God has given you life itself. God is keeping you in existence. And God is giving you every single good thing you're enjoying throughout the day. And one of the reasons I think he comes back to food and drink so often is that we all need food and drink to live. We all have to take in sustenance. And God has made it enjoyable. It's enjoyable in the moment. It's pleasant. It's pleasurable, and there's nothing you can do to sort of hang on to it or keep it. If you eat the croissant's gone. If you eat the steak, there's no more steak. There's nothing you can do to kind of hoard it. And I think Ecclesiastes is kind of using that as a picture or an object lesson. The way you enjoy something is simply receiving its goodness, being thankful for it, not trying to make it more than it is, and even recognizing that whatever your material circumstances, however much or little you have, if God has given you food and drink, you have something to enjoy and to thank him for. And so there's a radically different posture here. Rather than grasping for gain, you're receiving gifts. And there's a sense in which what Kohelet is seeing in my first half of the book is what happens when you try to grasp for gain. And then in these 7 passages where he's looking through the lens of creation, he's showing you what happens when you receive everything as a gift from God.
Even this idea of toil is something that can have value because work that respects the worth of toil, as you say, is driven by quality. So let's take a break because we want to get to the last section as well. And again, if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to go through this in a more careful way, that's why we would encourage you to get a copy of the book. We'll take a break and continue our conversation about Everything is Never Enough right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again as we talk about Everything is Never Enough. Bobby Jamieson with us, and we've talked about the first section of the book, A Ground Floor Absurd, and looked at 11 different aspects of that. Middle floor, Gift, and again, a number of key passages and chapters. Finally, the top floor, Beyond, and this is where you focus on what you might call fear and judgment. And I think it is really interesting because the illustration you use is that Kohelet actually takes the world in his hands, tosses it into a pan on medium-low heat, lets it simmer. As it begins to heat up, we think of all the things that were a part of those torturous chapters, whether we're talking about work, knowledge, pleasure, wealth, power, and each one of them eventually disappear. And what you're left with is fear God and keep his commandments. And so in some respects, when we come to the end, we come back to one of the basic principles that we should be using in living our life.
Yeah, that's right. You could say, we compared Ecclesiastes to Job earlier. You could also compare Ecclesiastes to Proverbs and say that where Ecclesiastes ends, Proverbs begins. So they share the same fundamental commitment to the fear of God and obedience to him. But Ecclesiastes goes through this whole journey to show us why fearing God and obeying his commands should be the center of our lives, and not striving for some kind of self-sought happiness. You know, and a lot of these things come together in one verse toward the end. He says in chapter 11, verse 9, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment." We can enjoy things because God's a generous giver. We can genuinely enjoy his gifts and receive them with gratitude and thanksgiving. And yet there's a but there. Because God is the giver of them, he also decides how to use them. Because God's the one who made them, he decides what counts as proper use or misuse. And so there is an ultimate accountability to him. And that reminds us, you know, Ecclesiastes, the bulk of it is on. Here's how not to live for this life. There's only a couple of hints here about living for the next life, but this is a really clear one. We will answer to God, so we should always be asking, how does this look in light of eternity? That should lead us to fear him and obey him, which is kind of an Old Testament way of summarizing the way we should rightly relate to God, and trust ourselves to him completely, submit to him, and delight in all of his ways.
It is interesting. Ecclesiastes is full of questions and not a whole lot of answers. And I think you were alluding to that just a minute ago. We may want to come as a manual that would help us live our life in, if you will, godly obedience. But that's not really the purpose of the book. It's more to raise some questions and for your, if you will, convictions, meditation, evaluation, wisdom to begin to apply that to your life.
Yes, that's a great way to put it, that Ecclesiastes is meant to unsettle us, to kind of help us reshape the very foundations of our heart, our commitments, our desires. It's very much more about shaking us up to show us what's in ourselves and then rightly orient us to God. And then books like Proverbs will much more fill that in and flesh it out. But Ecclesiastes is kind of a depth charge to get to the very bottom of us.
Very good. You know, we talked earlier about control, and I love one of the lines here. Fear and control usually sit on opposite ends of a seesaw. We've been talking about control up until now. Now we're talking about fear of God. It does seem to me that we certainly need to understand that we should fear God. We cannot control him. And in some respects, we should understand that we really can't control as much of our life as we think we can.
Yeah, that's right. And that should lead us both to fear God and to not be afraid of so many of the things that we often are, because God is good, because God is in charge, because God is the one writing this whole story. And so in that sense, a proper fear of God drives out fear of everything else.
Finally, we talk about fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. We talk about that in the New Testament, the judgment seat of Christ. We talk about the bema seat, but that's just a reminder again that there are some injustices in this world, but ultimately there will be justice in the next world, in the coming new heavens and new earth.
Yeah, that's right. And as Christians, we have two great hopes and two great anchors when we think about injustice. One is that God poured out his justice against sin and sinners on the cross. And so that's where our own sins are dealt with. That's where justice was done for us, for our sins against God. And when we also think about God's judgment, there will be all injustices perfectly dealt with, perfectly treated, perfectly righted. And so for all of the limits of earthly justice, that is one of the themes of Ecclesiastes, God's judgment, we often struggle to view God's judgment as good news, but it really is, because it is a righting of wrongs and the creation of a whole world of perfect justice and flourishing.
Well, many final words, because I think, again, if some people would want to teach this in their own Sunday school class or their own church, they could certainly contact you at Trinity Baptist Church right there in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But it does seem to me that you've written this in a way that we as individuals can go through this story. But in some respects, as we've been talking about this, I see this as a way in which you can take an entire congregation, a small group, or a life fellowship through it as well, can't you?
Absolutely. And I'd be delighted if anyone has specific follow-up questions. I'll be happy to talk with you, and pray that it's a useful resource for you and for your congregation, and even to use and give away evangelistically.
Well, if nothing else, I've appreciated your writing, and I appreciate you, if nothing else, very busy pastor, giving us an hour today. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for giving us an hour today to work our way through the book of Ecclesiastes, and we certainly appreciate the time and energy you put into the book and in the interview we did today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Let's, if we can, just before we run out of time, mention a couple of key issues. Number one, we have posted a number of viewpoints commentaries, so feel free to pull those down and read them. We have our Take Action item, Defend Parental Rights in America. We've been encouraging you to take action on that, but if you have not done so, it has to do with a piece of legislation that was actually put forward, the Families' Rights and Responsibilities Act. It was introduced earlier this year by Senator Tim Scott and James Langford, in the House by Representative Virginia Fox. I think you'll find that to be a very important issue and one that we certainly need to address as well. So that's on the website. And finally, if you found yourself saying, I'd like to find some of those articles. After all, you've spent some time talking with Lathan Watts. You've talked with Robert Knight about their two commentaries. We have those on wokeness. We have one about the hate group smear. Another one on American political realignment. I think we'll just postpone that till tomorrow. And, of course, we spent an hour talking with Dr. Bobby Jamieson on his book, Everything is Never Enough. All of that is available at the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to listen to it again, let me encourage you to go to that red button that says watch or listen. You might want to benefit from that. Pass it on to someone else, or use that if you decide you want to teach through this in your small group or in your Sunday school class. That is the case. And there's also that blue button which says donate now. And as I shared yesterday, as we get to the end of our fiscal year, which ends June 30th, I hope that you'll consider what you might do to support this ministry. We are dependent, as you know, on your financial gifts to keep the program going. I would encourage you, first of all, to support your local church. Also support the radio station that carries this program. But I would hope that you also would find your way to support this ministry. There are some real benefits, and one of those, of course, is to join with us as the Truth Team. $1 a day, $30 a month gives you an opportunity to receive so many great materials that we send to you in the mail, and it's a way in which you're part of the team making this broadcast possible. So, again, you can find out about all of that on our website, pointofview.net. Most importantly, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Karen, thank you for producing the program, and we'll see you tomorrow on our weekend edition right here on Point of View.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.